Raila Amolo Odinga, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Kenya and candidate of the Republic of Kenya for the position of Chairperson of the AU Commission, colleagues from Kenya, I see honorable members of parliament here present who have accompanied from print, electronic, and other forms of media. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon, colleagues. It's a pleasure to see you, and it's a bright day. So, my name is Ambassador George Orina, Ambassador of Kenya to the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, and Permanent Representative to the African Union and the United Nations Economic Commission. It is my pleasure to welcome you. I'll just provide a little guidance on how we're going to proceed for the day. We'll invite the candidate, and he has graciously accepted to come and give you a short statement. Thereafter, we will request him to come to the podium, and you will pose questions. I just want to request that we ask one question at a time, a short question, not a compound question, a short question straight to the point, and the candidate will respond. In the first round, we will take a total of 3 questions, and then we'll see if there are additional questions. So we'll take the first 3 questions, and thereafter, we will take yet another set of questions. You are raising your hand to ask the question. Okay. I recognize. Question number 1 will go to that citizen. Yes, citizen from Kenya. Who will pose the second question? Yes, question number 2. Which media house? AFP. Thank you. And the third question, which media house? Freelance journalist. I didn't hear a voice from the ladies. Can we have a question from one lady journalist? Yes, from which media house? Okay, thank you. That's the 4th question and the final question. Looking around the house. Okay, we'll take those 4 questions, and in case a question arises, then we'll take it from there. It is now my singular honor to invite the Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga, candidate for the position of AU Chairperson. Excellency, please come and share with us your vision.
Oh, you may be seated. I just noticed that you have questions even before I've said anything. I mean that you're not interested in what I want to say. You just want to ask me questions. Therefore, I'm not going to also waste too much of your time. But I want to first begin by welcoming the members of the 4th Estate to this session. I have had a very long relationship with the media. I know that the media has got a very, very important role to play in any society, because you're the ones who convey the information to the people. And development is about the people. So the people need to be properly informed. That is what helps them to make correct decisions. So last evening, I had the opportunity to talk at length about my vision for the African Union. I had made a decision to come because this position is becoming vacant next year. And after consultations, many of my friends across the continent, they felt that I should offer myself for the position of the leadership at this moment in time. We all, among those friends of mine, are Pan-Africanists. And you know, Pan-Africanism is an ideology coined sometime in the last century. Its intention is to try to emancipate the people of Africa and to raise Africa to the rest of the world level, so that African people can be treated as equal citizens of this globe. As you know, it came against the background of colonial domination of the continent. It raised the consciousness of African people to fight for their liberation. And through a bitter struggle, eventually independence was won across Africa. First, you know, the Ghana was the first African country to become independent. But before that, you need to know that Ethiopia, where we are, is the oldest African country. In other words, Ethiopia was never colonized. Ethiopia has always been independent. When the colonialists came here, they found a system of governance that was much superior to their own. So when they were in Berlin, Ethiopia was excluded in that partition of Africa. But Ethiopia also suffered in that period because of discriminations and so on. So Ethiopia played a role in supporting liberation movements across the continent. That is why the Emperor Haile Selassie, at that time, who was the head of government, invited leadership of the independent African countries and the leadership of the liberation movements to come to Addis Ababa. And Addis Ababa became the venue for the formation of Organization of African Unity here. And 2 weeks ago, to celebrate the opening of a refurbished the African. Then the founders of African Unity who were here. There were several heads of state from the country, the countries in the continent which were independent. There were several heads of state from the country, the Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah is the one who had convened the first meeting of African leaders in Accra. Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah is the one who had convened the first meeting of African leaders in Accra, Ghana, in 1958. It was here. Ahmed Sékou Touré, who had led the second independent country, that is Guinea, 1958, was here. Mwalimu Julius Nyerere was also here. Leopold Sédar Senghor of Senegal was here. Houphouët-Boigny of Côte d'Ivoire was here. Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe of Nigeria was here. And that's when Organization of African Unity was formed. They focus in helping or assisting the unliberated countries of Africa to get freedom. a movement was coined here, which is called PAFMEXA, Pan-African Freedom Movement for Eastern, Central, and Southern Africa. And they went further because in South Africa, the whites were saying that South Africa was already independent. But then it came up what was called the NIBMA, No Independence for Majority Rule. So Dar es Salaam became the headquarters of liberation of Africa. Mwalimu Nyerere gave facilities and financial support to this liberation movement. And the OAU itself here was basically mobilizing the world for the liberation of Africa. Eventually, with the fall of apartheid regime in South Africa in 1994, the rest of the continent was now liberated. OAU had accomplished its task. So it was then transformed to AU. Now, AU focuses more on development, cooperation, and unity of Africa. Unity has always been there at the core, right from the days when the founding conference was held here in Addis Ababa. There was the question of unity now, African Union government now. And there are two schools of thought. One, the union government now. The other one is gradual process of unity. Start first with the regional the building block. Were the Central African Union, then you have got the Maghreb Union. These are the building blocks of a united Africa. So here, AU has, since it was formed, done, I could say, a commendable work of trying to bring these African countries together and trying to deal with issues which affect the continent of Africa. If you look at my blueprint there, I've outlined critical issues. We talked about security, peace and security, because there can be no development if there's no peace. In 2013, they came up with silencing the guns. That's when they had coined the Vision 2063. In 2013, OAU was exactly 50 years old. They celebrated the golden anniversary of the movement. Now the focus on the next 50 years, that's why you have the Vision 2063. And here, number one is peace. And I think probably they were overambitious. They said they want guns to be silent by 2020. 2020 is 4 years ago. The guns were not silent then, neither are they silent today. They ask, why are they not silent? And how can they be silenced? That's a challenge facing the leadership of this organization. Food security is another one. As you know, I keep on saying that Africa is the richest continent in terms of resources. But the paradox is that the richest continent is also the poorest in terms of living conditions of its people. Of course, we blame the historical past, the colonization, the domination, the exploitation of our continent. But we're saying that that was past. What have we been able to do, and what are we able of doing to change this paradox? That is a challenge that is before us here. We have talked about inter-African trade, because in development you require first resources that we have, both natural and human resources we have. Secondly, you require market where you're going to take your goods. You need first to produce the goods and then have a market where you're going to sell them. Then you need infrastructure. Infrastructure may be a challenge because, as you know, the colonial system had partitioned Africa into smaller units and had not integrated these units. You find here it was a colony. This one was Belgian. Next to it here, this was one French. This other one here was Portuguese. This one here was English or British, and so on and so forth. And though they are neighbors, they are not communicating. There was no physical infrastructure that connected these countries. So the challenge is how to integrate these countries so that they can be able to trade with each other. Infrastructure is a major challenge. And then barriers. You have got linguistic barriers that are imposed on our people. And then this government came up with non-tariff barriers, which has made it difficult for goods to move from one country to the other. This is another challenge that is facing us here. You have got issues of health. As you know, we have got several pandemics which are here on the continent. How do you deal with this to make the people of the continent healthy and to deal with some of those diseases that emerge from time to time in the continent? Education is another challenge. Manpower development in the continent. Because, as you know, Africa today is the fastest growing in terms of population. Africa is the youngest continent demographically. 70% of our population are below the age of 35. The youth, as I've been saying, can be a blessing or a curse. A curse if this youth is not empowered, if they're not given opportunities to acquire knowledge so that they can be productive. They become a drag to the society. They become drug addicts, delinquents, criminals. But if they are empowered with requisite skills and knowledge, then they become a source for wealth creation in the society. This is the challenge again that we have in the continent across. Right now, many of our youths are jobless. Some of them have got skills which they cannot use on the continent. That's why many of them are voting with their feet, trying to leave the continent to look for greener pastures outside the continent. African youths, almost in every other month you hear, are drowning in the Mediterranean, trying to reach greener pastures in Europe. How do you stem that tide of migration? These people are basically escaping poverty. That's why they're trying to go to Europe. That's the reason why we are telling Europeans to work with us, rather than working against us, to work with us so that we can be able to create an enabling environment where these youths will not have a need to leave Africa to go to Europe. We want to reverse this trend. This is a major challenge to us as Africans here. We talked about hunger, famine in the continent. Africa has got the biggest arable land for food production today. Yet, we have food deficiency in almost all African countries. How do we reverse this trend? How do we improve agricultural production so that we can be self-sufficient in terms of food? Today, we are net importers. It's so just when this war between Russia and Ukraine broke out, many African countries suffered seriously because you find that most of them are importing grain from Ukraine and Russia. Why don't we grow these products here on the continent? And then the issue of climate change is a major challenge to the continent. Africa is a victim rather than offender in this subject of climate change, because Africa's emission is less than 5%. Properly, not just around 3%. But Africa suffers seriously the consequences of climate change. Many African countries today live between two twin disasters: floods and drought, El Nino and La Nina. So when the floods come, they come with devastations. People are drowned in their homes. Houses are destroyed. Roads are washed. Bridges are washed away. So you find that you have serious damages that requires a lot of resources to repair. When La Nina comes, then again people suffer seriously. You find animals are dying for lack of water. People are dying for lack of water. There's a famine across the continent. Seriously. How do we make the offenders, those people who have been vomiting this trash in our environment, that has made the entire globe to warm up like this, to compensate Africa for the damages that Africa is suffering? If Africa goes as individual countries to negotiate, they just take advantage of you. There's need for Africa to negotiate as one voice for adequate compensation for this destruction of our continent. I could go on and on. There are several issues, of course, of the youth. issues of gender, the African woman. How do we make sure that the African woman is given her base recognition for the contribution that is making to the society? That is another challenge that is there. So then, in this new world that is globalizing, and where now new technology has come, we now have AI driving development. Where does Africa sit? And how does Africa use this new knowledge to leapfrog development, to be able to catch up with the rest of the world? This is a challenge, again, which the AU can lead the way for the continent. So we have a platform here on the continent because we have got a lot of problems. We are trying to see that Africa moves closer to each other, like now Europe today. If you look at the history of the European Union, it has been a history of step by step. It started first just as a cold union between France and Germany. It moved on until it became a European Economic Community, and then moved further to become the European Union. Today, European Union is very effective in coordinating development in Europe. You have a European Parliament, which passes laws which are then adopted by the European governments. A far cry comparison to the Pan-African Parliament in Joburg. You have got the European Court of Justice, and then the European Union Executive in Brussels. So Europe is just as diverse as Africa. The European countries are very diverse. You need to know that just before I was being born, Europe was fighting against each other seriously. And after that, even coming together was a major problem. There was a lot of discrimination between Europeans. If you look at that fascism of Hitler, Aryan race, and so on, they also have got tribes in Europe. They are Anglo-Saxons, they are Latinos, they are the Slavs, and so on. But that has faded into oblivion. You've got a European Union that can speak with one voice. Why should languages be a barrier in the continent? Oh, this one is an Anglophone, this one is Francophone, Russophone, Arabophone, and so on. We want to be Afrophones and speak as one people, as Africans. To me, this is the most important thing in the continent. To have Africa for Africans, and Africa speaking with one voice for unity of Africa. Thank you.
A round of applause, please, for the candidate. Thank you. Thank you. Like I previously indicated, please, one question. Do we have roving mics? Who is helping me with the mics? Thank you. I've been told that charity begins at home, so the number one question will not go to my brother from Kenya, but rather to my sister from Ethiopia. Please give the charity begins at home. The gentleman has paved way for the lady.
Okay, thank you. You have been telling us about the challenge you are thinking that are pressing Africa at this time. So what are the very clear and sound measures that your administration is going to take to address them?
Please tell us your name and where you're from.
Mr. Selassie from Asham Television.
Okay, thank you. Repeat the question, please, and a bit slowly so that we can all get you.
Okay. You have been telling us about the challenge that you think Africa is facing at this time. So what are the sound and clear and specific measures that you are going to take to address them?
The challenges that Africa is facing and what are the actions we can take to overcome these challenges. That's your question. Thank you for that. Let's give the microphone now to AFP. Okay. Sorry, I said we take one question, we get an answer, then we take the next one. I'm not rewriting that. So let's give the candidate identify that Africa is facing. What are the solutions to those challenges?
Well, the challenges are many, as you've seen. I think the solution one is to try to promote unity among the African countries. Unity is a prerequisite to development generally. So we want to first ensure that African countries can speak with one voice, that they are united. And this unity begins first at home. We'll try to work with the government of the African Union to ensure that there is harmony and peace within the countries. Peace is very important, prerequisite to development. Areas where there is conflict, the East African Community, the SADC, ECOWAS, and Maghreb, and so on. We want to ensure that these regional groupings actually work properly and harmoniously, because they are the building blocks of African unity, Pan-African unity, so that whatever we're doing can be implemented through these regional groupings. I'll give you an example. You've got the issues like the issue of infrastructure mentioned. And I have been fortunate to have been the high representative of AU on infrastructure. AU has got ambitious program, what is called PIDA, a program for infrastructure development in Africa. And they've identified several projects like the Pan-African highways. Secondly, the African high-speed railway network. Then you have got the energy program across the continent. Then you have got transport, air transport, and also water transport. and then there's fiber optic connections between the capitals of the continent. Now, each of these infrastructure programs have got what they call the champions, headed by a president, champions in them. But most of those projects have not moved. Most of them have not moved. If you take, for example, the inter-African highways, there's Cape to Cairo. And then there's Tunis to the Cape. And then there is Dakar through Bamako, Khartoum to Djibouti. You've got Dakar to Lagos, Lagos to Mombasa. Then you've got the rail network from Beira in Mozambique to Lubito in Angola, and branching to Walvis Bay in Namibia. You've got another high-speed rail network coming from Lagos, going through Cotonou, Benin, Lomé, in Togo, Accra, in Ghana, Abidjan, in Côte d'Ivoire, Freetown, going to Conakry, going all the way to Rabat, to Algiers, Tunis, to Cairo. Lagos to Cairo. Then you've got Lapset, the Lamu port in Kenya, going through Juba, Bangui in Central African Republic, to Kribi in the Cameroon port, which links the Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean and opens up the landlocked countries within the continent to rail transport. You've got water transport along the rivers, the Congo, the Nile, from Lake Victoria to Atlantic. All those are there, but they're just on paper. They are not being implemented. So why are they not being implemented? That is the question that we need to answer so that these projects can be implemented. There is open skies. This is the air transport across the continent. That makes it easier without effective ground infrastructure. Air transport is an intermediate way of moving people and goods. Yet even there is a bureaucracy. Each and every country has got its own air traffic control system. So to overfly the airspace of a country, you need permission from the National Air Traffic Control Authority. And they are not properly coordinated so that permit can be issued within 1 hour. You can take 2 or 3 days to get the permits to overfly. And even the commercial airlines that are flying are having to pay a lot of fees. You're charging somebody for flying in the air and you've done nothing in that air. It's just transiting. It's stupid because it makes it very expensive for travelers. Air transport in Africa is more expensive than it is in Europe. This is, for example, low-hanging fruits that can be harvested very easily and quickly. So I'm saying that to answer your question, the challenges and there are solutions. Why are we not using the solutions to deal with the challenges? Okay? So that is not for me to answer. I'm saying that I have an answer if I'm given an opportunity to come and sit here, I will be able to move the organization to getting solutions to these problems. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The second question, AFP, please.
Dylan Gamba, AFP, Asante Sana Baba. There is currently growing tension between Ethiopia and Somalia regarding the signing of a MOU between Ethiopia and Somaliland. What is your stance and what is your opinion on this issue? Asante Sana.
Thank you.
Well, the tensions exist between several countries. There's tension between Ethiopia and Eritrea. There's tension between Ethiopia and Egypt. There's tension between Ethiopia and Somalia, because of the Somaliland and so on. My view is that where there's a problem, there's a solution. There's a solution. And solution is basically getting people together to have a conversation and negotiations so that these problems can be solved. I don't know any other way of doing it. I'm sure that we'll be able to solve these problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Third question, where is a gentleman from Citizen? I think he's waited for too long. Sorry. Thank you for your kindness.
Thank you very much. Right Honorable Raila Odinga. My name is Seth Olale from Citizen TV Kenya. Mine would be, Right Honorable, how do you intend to navigate through the geopolitics of Africa, of the continent, in securing your candidacy? You have, like you mentioned in your speech, you have the Francophones, you have the Arabic nations, you have the SADC, and then you have EAC, not forgetting the Horn of Africa. How do you intend to navigate through that?
You see, then some of these problems are artificially created. Because, you know, when Africa was fighting for independence, there was a lot of unity. You see, for example, Dar es Salaam became the headquarters of the liberation of Southern Africa. You find the Mozambican Frelimo at their camp there around Bagamoyo. The ANC were around Morogoro and so on. They were being supported easily. Before that, you find that a number of South Africans who are going to Europe, escaping the appetite, were getting their travel documents in Dar es Salaam. I myself, because the colonialists could not give me a passport because of my father's involvement in the liberation struggle, I was taken to Dar es Salaam and I got my travel document from Mwalimu Nyerere. And that's how I went to Europe. And for 3 years, I was living in Europe as a Tanganyikan and later on as a Tanzanian. I only got my Kenyan passport in 1965. In Cairo, President Gamal Abdel Nasser put up a secretariat for the liberation movement of Africa. There are all these liberation movements, ANC, the Communist Party of South Africa, Frelimo, the Congress of Malawi, the MPLA, Angola, the SWAPO of now Namibia, KANU of Kenya, and all had the offices in Cairo. And that is where they are coordinating support for liberation movement and all those countries. Nkrumah had set up a center in Ghana where most of these people are living in exile. Mugabe was a teacher in Ghana. A number of Mozambican leaders were there in Ghana. People like Bill Konangi was working there in Ghana at that time. Joy Padma, many people. So Africa was then very united during that period. There was no Arab Africa. There was no Franco-Africa. There was no Anglo-Africa. The support was universal across the continent. Those founding fathers, Ahmed Sékou Touré of Guinea, Modibo Keïta of Mali, Léopold Senghor of Senegal, Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Nigeria, Ahmed Ben Bella, Algeria, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt, Haile Selassie, Ethiopia, Mwalimu Nyerere, Tanzania, Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya. Those were Pan-Africanists at that time. So they were never thinking about themselves as coming from these colonial states. They are seeing themselves as Africans first. And I'm sure that we are able to recreate that spirit of Pan-Africanism that will unite Africans irrespective of their ethnicity, of their colonial heritage, or of their linguistic heritage, but that they are Africans. First and foremost, be Africans. You should be Afrophone, not Lusophone, Francophone, Arabophone, Anglophone. This is my position. It is possible to unite African people and think first and foremost as Africans. Thank you.
Thank you. We had a freelancer, yes, on that table.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. As you said, much of the population of the continent are under 35, and you're giving us names that a majority of us no longer identify. I mean, it's history. You're running for a position that should look ahead. For instance, if you walk into the African Union headquarters, much of the work of the African Union is funded by the European Union, including the peacekeeping that's happening in Somalia. The building itself is built by the Chinese. You talk about all kinds of things you say that should be done in the continent. How do you want to pay for it? How should the leadership, or under you or the other candidates, be able to pay for it and embrace an idea that's independent, financially self-sufficient than the status quo at the moment? And my second question is, we're seeing uprising happening in this continent. In your country, it's happening in Mozambique. What are these young people telling the African leadership? Thank you.
Thank you. First, I'm giving you history because history is important in a development. You cannot develop without history. That's where we come from. But I'm saying you don't want to live in history. You are living for the future. But because of history, you don't want to repeat the mistakes which you have made in the past. You want to use it to inform what you want to do going forward. Yes, it is true that currently the bigger portion of the budget of the AU is funded by European Union, other countries. Now, that is also historical. But ask yourself, why should that be the case? Who is funding the European Union? The European Union is funding itself. The member states of the European Union fund the European Union. Why is it that AU should be depending on foreign funding for its operations? That is, again, a question that needs to be answered by the leadership of the continent. I'm saying that we can be able to mobilize our resources within our continent to fund our development. But countries will contribute on the basis of the benefit they get from the organization. If it is just a dead-end investment, most countries should not see the need. But if they see that AU is doing something that is beneficial to themselves, I'm sure that most African countries will be willing to fund the activities of the AU. That is my view. Now, yes, the youth, I've mentioned that the African youth is vibrant. And African youth needs to be challenged. African youth needs to be empowered. If African youth is empowered, it will become a source for wealth creation in our country. There are countries similar to Africa. You see, you need the economies of scale. There are some countries which are just too small in terms of population to be able to benefit from demography. But if they come together, then you will have the benefits of the economies of scale. You look at China. China's population is almost the same like African population today. China first China spent a lot of resources in manpower development. They developed a highly skilled manpower, the youth of China. So that when they liberalized their economy, they opened it up, China became a very, very attractive investment destination. So most of European manufacturers saw one, highly skilled and cheap labor. Two, they also saw a cheap source of raw materials. And that's why they rushed to China. You look at these automobile manufacturers, Mercedes, BMW, VW, Peugeot, Citroën, Volvo, Ford, Nissan, Toyota, Hyundai, they're all in China. All manufactured in China and they're exporting to the rest of the world. Just irrespective of China's economic, and political philosophy, they rush to China and produce in China. Why can they come to Africa? The cheap materials that they are rushing for in China is made with raw materials from Africa. China imports bauxite from Africa to make aluminum products. It imports iron ore, copper ore from Africa to go and make copper cables, copper products, to go and make steel products in China. And they're still cheap in China. That's why the American companies are rushing there to China, the European companies. Why can't we do that in Africa itself? It's now because China has now moved on with that advantage that they created. China managed to move 600 million people from poverty to middle income status. So China today has got the biggest middle income in the world today. But China is no longer the cheapest today. China's labor cost is no longer that low. There's a gap down there which Africa can fill. And Africa can use the same scenario to be able to also take off. You've got the youth, And African youth today is very dynamic. African youth, if you look at the social media, it's dominated by African youth. You see, this AI, African youth actually have been able to get a hold of AI, and they're very much into it. So what you need is basically create facilities for them, have connectivity.
What are the young people telling you in terms of the uprising that you're seeing in Kenya and in Mozambique? My question wasn't on China or AI, respectfully. What are the young people telling you when you see the young people protesting, uprising in your country, in Mozambique? What are they telling you? It's not a question of how China has become advanced in the last 40 years or how AI will have an impact in our lives. But specifically, my question is, respectfully again, is what are you seeing, what are you feeling when you see young people do the uprising? We're beginning to see risking their lives and so many young people, Africans, dying in their own countries. Thank you.
That, of course, I was trying to answer maybe in a longer way, but yes, it's not just Kenya or Mozambique. Political challenges exist virtually in all countries in the world. It's not only in Africa. You'll find demonstrations in Colombia. You will find the other time in France, they were burning tires on the streets in Paris, and so on and so forth. So every country has got its political challenges. It's not only in Africa. It is all over the world. And those political challenges can be resolved within those countries themselves. You need to address the issues that the youth are raising. Like in Kenya, they are talking about the cost of living. They're talking about unemployment in Kenya. They're talking about corruption. You see, they talk about ethnic discrimination, things like those. So those are challenges that can be resolved within the context of Kenyan society. The same thing in Mozambique. They are talking about the elections. Elections have just been held, and some people believe that they are probably not as transparent. That there were some kind of cheating, probably in the process of announcement of results. That happens in virtually every society. You saw it in the U.S. the other time. People marching to the Congress, storming the Congress. So it is not only happening in Africa. It's happening all over the world, and there are solutions to those problems.
Thank you, thank you. And the very last question, let's have the gentleman there.
Right Honorable Dr. Raila Amolo Odinga, former Prime Minister, Republic of Kenya, and candidate of African Union chairmanship. I have an important question. How would you prioritize address African Continental Free Trade Area AfCFTA implementation? How do you strengthen African voice in global governance and international relations? What's your approach to negotiating partnership with external actors such as the EU, China, and the US? How do you promote African interests in global forums like UN and G20? Other regarding SATM?
Sorry, I said one question at a time.
Okay,
Thank you.
I need to add one question. How do you advance the implementation of the single African air transport market, SATM, to boost connectivity and economic integration? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, one is the African Free Trade Area agreement. This is now getting to be 3 years old, but it still has not had the impact that was required. The inter-African trade still has not moved much from 15%. As you know, the inter-European trade stands at 70%. Inter-Asian trade is at 50%. Even in South American is over 30%. So we know the factors. One is the infrastructure. And this is something that we want to fast track so that we can have infrastructure opening up the borders across the continent. And secondly, the non-tariff barriers that have been imposed by member states of the continent. And this again is something that we need to address. As you know, there is a reform of the AU process which is ongoing. It was initially led by the president of Rwanda, Mr. Kagame. Kagame has written a report which has now been handed over to the new chair, President William Ruto of Kenya. And we were with President Ruto here 2 days ago when we talked to the diplomats here about these challenges and how these reforms can be carried out. If these reforms are carried out, they will enable the AU to deal with these issues, and we can be able to raise the inter-African trade from what it is today to 40%, which is what is being aimed at by 2030. It's the same thing now. It will then also help us in dealing with our other trading partners, that is the EU and also China and even the US. You see, US, we have got AGOA, which has been ongoing, and we think that we need to improve on AGOA. With the EU, we also have been negotiating and scale up the negotiations so that the trade can be more fairer in favor of Africa. You see, for example, we take just a simple item, coffee. You see, coffee is produced primarily in Africa and in South America. But we find that the European country, I will not mention which one, earns more out of coffee than all these coffee-producing countries, Brazil and Africa, put together. So, because the auction center is not in Africa or South America, it is somewhere in Europe. How do you change this so that the African coffee producers can benefit? There are so many other things that we need to negotiate so that we get a fair deal on the international market generally. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw one last hand, and since not so many ladies have spoken, I see one across the room, please. Where is the microphone? Oh, there's one at the back. Okay.
No.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'll take the lady at the back, the lady here, and
okay.
And one there. The lady, not the gentleman. The gentleman already spoke. 3 ladies.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. My questions are, as we all know that everybody...
Please introduce yourself and the media house.
Rahma Mohammed from Tarata 97.6 FM station in Addis.
I can't see her. Can she move?
Can you try and stand this side so that the candidate at least can appreciate and see you.
Okay. So shall I proceed? Okay, my questions are, the first one is, as we all know that there are many ongoing conflicts in Africa, especially DRC and the Sudan case. So what are we expect from Raila Odinga if you are selected as a chairperson? What are you going to do to solve and also to make sure that the peace and stability of the continent? What are you going to do on this? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, the conflicts not only in Africa, there's conflict all over the world. But you see, where there's conflict, there's a solution. Like you mentioned specifically the DRC, in eastern DRC, there's that conflict that has been going on for a long time. So conflicts which are internal, but the conflicts which are have got external actors and players. So you just need to find a way of bringing the protagonists to a negotiating table. You see, DRC issue did not start yesterday. It has been there for a long time. And some of us who have been long enough, have seen it and have actually sometimes we have been pained by what has been happening. So many innocent lives have been lost in the process of this conflict. It can be resolved, and in my view, it must be resolved. I have had the occasion to talk to the protagonists in this issue, and I've said that we can sit down and find a lasting solution to this problem. Right now, you've got interests left, right, and center. There's tension between the DRC, Rwanda, Uganda, and Kenya. We can resolve this issue by getting the major actors together to sit together and agree on a solution, in my view. So what we intend to do is to not to apportion blame, who is wrong, who is right. It is wrong for people to die, irrespective of who is responsible. So we need to sit down and find a lasting solution to this problem. You know that foreigners who are non-Africans are also involved because they have got vested interests in some of those conflicts. Some of them benefit from the chaos that exists there. So what we intend to do is not to apportion blame, but to address the solution to this issue. I'm sure we can find a solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Konji Zaude. I'm working at the local television station. I think we are focusing on the peace and security of the continent as a woman, because women are the ones who are suffering out of this endless war throughout the continent. My focus also on the silencing the gun, which is the Agenda 2063 of the AU's. How do you address your measures to keep the gun silence throughout the continent? And also there are so many armed groups in Africa. What are you going to do with those groups which are creating war, disability, and displaced the societies where they are living in, who creates the problem across the continent? What measures are you going to take throughout your administration time? Thank you.
Yes, as you rightly said that they say the guns will be silent by 2020. but they are not silent. They are still loud and speaking very loudly. Yes, I said when I was making my comment earlier here that you need to address the root causes of this problem in order to find a solution. You know, some of them is historical, some of them have got the roots on resource sharing, some of them are ethnic, some of them are cultural, some of them have got to do with the regions, regional conflicts, and so on. So, what you need to do is to address the causative factors. What is it? Some of them to do with poverty in society. Some of them has to do with the lack of infrastructure. We have seen, for example, in Kenya, there are areas where to go to certain part of Kenya, you would have to have police escorts, escorting 100 vehicles, some police in front and police at the tail. It's when you could pass those areas. But when we put up infrastructure, proper highway, those areas, those bodies just disappeared. By opening up the country through infrastructure, it is a major solution to these problems. Because some areas where you see those gorillas running around, they are unreachable. Therefore, they can commit crimes, kill people, and they cannot be reached. They know where to go and hide completely. So, opening up the country is one of the solutions. Then secondly, creating wealth. First, putting up education facilities so that people can be able to go to school. And then bringing investment in the areas. Bringing manufacturing unit factories in the area, putting up housing, modern housing in the regions and so on, open up those areas. So it is not something that you deal with just instantly, but it is a process. I'm sure that we can find a solution lasting solution to these problems generally. Okay?
Thank you. The final question at that table.
Thank you, Right Honorable. I'm coming from my own media, Africa in Change, which is focused on youth in Africa. My questions are two. The first one is, as you know, Agenda 2063 is coming very faster. So about good governance, what are the measures that you have planned to do?
What you understand is group?
Pardon, sir?
Repeat the question, please.
Okay. My first question is related to good governance. Agenda 2063, one of the team is bringing a good governance to Africa. So what is your plan to implement this in a very serious way, maybe abstaining state countries who are repeatedly participating in war, or bringing the governments into court, not to ICC, but the African court. You can't hear me?
Good governance. It's about good governance.
The first one is good governance and measures that are taken to make sure we have good governance.
Thank you.
The second one is...
No, one question only, please.
Okay, recommendation then. How are you going to make independent, the EU independent from other incomes, like bringing our own financial independency? Thank you.
The question is, how are we going to enhance good governance in Africa? And how can we enhance the independence of the African Union?
Thank you so much. Good governance, as you know, African countries are not uniform. They're coming from different historical backgrounds. But what you need to do is basically have a basic minimum standards that must be enforced for a country to remain a member of the Union. As you can see, in the EU, they have standards that they have set up. EU. And they keep on evaluating the country's performance, even those which are members of the EU. For example, your system of governance, your systems of doing elections in the country, the systems of security, the issues of corruption, and so on. So we need to set up standards because, you know, you had this Africa peer review mechanism, which is there, but you need to take the reports that are coming from the institution seriously, enforcing those recommendations, ensuring that states keep on moving towards the ideals. This, in my view, is what will help to strengthen democracy within the continent. Because my view is that democracy is very critical to good governance in the continent. So it's not something that you need to wash away. You must do it and ensure that, because already you've got these countries as members, you must ensure that there is improvement towards the ideal which has been set by the institution. That to me is very critical. And the people themselves need to be allowed to speak, so that people's voices are heard. Because they say that is the wearer of the shoe who knows where the shoe is pinching. And this is the people. Because there's some government themselves who will give you because of a rousy picture of themselves. You find an election is held in a country and you see that 99.9% of registered people voted, and they voted just for a particular way. So you need to have a standard of measuring performance. Then going forward, how to make AU independent as an institution is by ensuring that the member states make their contributions to the AU. Like the talk of 0.2% of the tariffs or levy of imports from non-AU members being remitted to the kitty of AU. If that are to be implemented, the AU would not need to beg from elsewhere. We'll be able to fund most of their affairs directly.
Thank you so much for that. Colleagues, I know we have so many questions, but that's the much that we can take because there are other engagements and we also have travel plans. Let me also take this opportunity to inform that yes, we are receiving, as we sit here, requests for exclusive interviews. Why we organize this was so that all of us could be at the same place and pose questions and capture the responses to that. So we will not be in a position to offer exclusive interviews except for the AFP who had made an earlier request and which had been granted, and that's the much time that we do have. So you will bear with us that we are not able to grant more exclusive interviews. With that, I just want to also make a second announcement that we do have lunch for you all. So kindly, after this, lunch is served. Let's give a round of applause to the candidate for the responses he has had. And let me also take this opportunity to thank the members of the Fourth Estate. You play a critical role, a very critical role, in telling the story of Africa. And since you're the ones telling this story, that role is important in helping Africa advance its story in terms of the solutions that we are putting in place to address some of the challenges that you have so eloquently put. Therefore, I would like to encourage you to continue to tell the story of Africa as it is in terms of the programs under Agenda 2063, in terms of the solutions or options that the candidate has offered going forward in terms of addressing the issues that we have at the continent. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, lunch is served. Thank you. And this session is adjourned.